So more and more recently, I've seen comments asking about the negative effects of big spending stimulus bills. And the questions typically come in some pretty doomsday format, something like, is more stimulus going to crash the dollar? Or is the US going to go bankrupt? Well, I've mentioned the secondary effects of big stimulus bills a number of times in my regular update videos in the past. However, I decided, you know what? I should really dive into this question and see what exactly the research says. I need to know both sides of this if I'm going to argue one side or the other. I have to know as much as possible. And I think you're going to be surprised by what I've found. Although an overwhelming number of economists suggest that pumping money into the system during crises like this COVID pandemic we're in the middle of is a net positive, what exactly does all the stimulus money really do for the economy? Does it simply provide a temporary band-aid? Does it implement some deep economical changes? And most importantly, do people come out the other side better off with this stimulus money, or will we be better off without ever having it? Before we get into too deep, I did literally hours of research on this video. So if you wouldn't mind just giving the video a like if you enjoy it. And you know what? Go ahead and subscribe too if you haven't already. And if you're already a subscriber, make sure you click the notification bell and have it set to all. All right, diving in. Let's start off with a question. Just how do stimulus packages work in the first place? Well, they're comprised of a wide range of different government taxation and spending measures. And when the government enacts what's called fiscal stimulus, they are essentially creating and handing out cash. Now, this cash can come in a variety of different ways. It can come through direct subsidies, it can come through loans, tax incentives, and then this can go to individuals, companies, and even entire industries as a whole. Economics professor DeLong at the University of California, Berkeley argues that it's the role of the government to spend and do whatever it takes to get us out of the crisis and back on track. DeLong feels that using inflation is a good measuring point as to where exactly we sit. Here's an exact quote from him. He says, "There are no signs of significant inflation yet, so we're not doing enough right now. We should do more and keep doing more until inflation measures tell us that we've done enough and the demand is sloping over into higher inflation rather than higher employment." These feelings from DeLong are countered by Professor Boldrin of the Washington University in St. Louis, who feels that instead of pumping as much fiscal help into the system as possible, there needs to be targeted funding to infrastructures that will cause long-term change to help fight future recessions. So we've heard both sides of this argument in Congress in the past, and both honestly have their own pros and cons and perfectly factual agreements on both sides. The problem is we're in a situation that we've never been in before. I mean, let's compare this to the '08 housing crash. The thing that really sets this crisis apart from the '08 housing crash is the uncertainty of the coronavirus. Although experts and lawmakers have a healthy fear of raising the deficit, the common practice, again, is just to throw money at the problem. And throwing money at the problem can help as long as it's spent effectively. We have to think, what is the economic return for every dollar of stimulus spent? And actually, I have more on that in a minute. So the major issue we face here is because no one can say for certain when the virus will be completely under control. And because of this, it's nearly impossible to really say whether we're overspending or not. Michael Hayes, the assistant professor of public policy and administration at Rutgers University, spoke to the long-term effects of passing these bills, saying, quote, "With a health crisis that has yet to be contained, it is possible that further stimulus bills may need to be passed to prevent a severe and prolonged recession. With that being said, there is a long-term financial cost because the government is borrowing money to pay for these bills. Even though the 10-year government bond interest rate has been less than 1% for the last 6 months, the federal government's budget might be restricted due to the growing size of the national debt. However, a speedy economic recovery should help reduce federal deficits in future fiscal years." And at the end there, he's basically saying big spending right now is a bet that we'll have a quick economic recovery. Then he went on to say, further research suggests that for every dollar spent by the government creates over $1.50 in economic output. So of course, we're at least getting more than what we're spending here. So it's tough to compare the latest two stimulus bills to any stimulus bill in the past for a few reasons. First, there are groundbreaking spending bills. We've never seen spending quite at these levels before. And the overall circumstances are just so varied as well. And because of this, predicting negative outcomes are nearly impossible. I mean, we're truly in uncharted waters, and this seems to only be the beginning, because as time goes on, we're hearing more and more proposals in record-breaking ranges. I mean, from $3 trillion to $5 trillion. One negative outcome we can know for sure with all this is the rise in national debt. With the latest stimulus bills and government funding bills, the United States is sitting at about $25 trillion in total debt. Interest rates are currently so low, though, that adding to the debt doesn't cause too much damage. However, those interest rates will rise, and with that rise in interest rates, taxes will rise as well to pay back that deficit. These tax spikes most likely won't happen until well after the coronavirus pandemic is under control. But nonetheless, they will come back to pay for those stimulus packages. Another way the government can cut away at the deficit is through cutting spending. This is nice in that we won't personally get taxed more, but it's not so nice in that it would mean cutting thousands of existing jobs and just adding more issues to the overall economy. An article written by economist Paul Quick brought up some interesting points on how stimulus spending is bad policy in his opinion. He compared stimulus spending to this scene. Picture a man filling a leaking pool with buckets of water, and the media and citizens are all focusing on this new water. They're splashing around and celebrating its arrival. But then picture zooming out on the scene only to see that same man who was filling the pool with the buckets of water was actually just running around to the other side of the pool to fill up his bucket, to then run back and pour the water in front of everyone again. Essentially what he's saying is the government is just moving money from one area to another and causing loss along the way, and then when it comes to fruition, taxes are raised. So we find ourselves walking this tricky tightrope here. We know that if nothing is done, millions will suffer and lose out on so much. They'll lose their homes. They've already lost their jobs. They are at higher chances of getting sick. But if we give out too much money, there are diminishing returns and may have secondary consequences. And either way, we're adding to our national debt. At the end of the day, though, most experts say they would rather see us enter into inflation and ride that wave to a steady economy slowly upwards instead of holding off and potentially crashing and burning and hoping for a successful rebuild. So now that you've seen the arguments on both sides, what do you think? Are you worried about the debt rising? Do you think it's not something we should worry about right now? I just thought it was important to give the argument on both sides. That way you can have an educated opinion as to what you believe is best moving forward with the country. Let me know your thoughts below. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a profitable day.